The galaxy thundered its celebration. Certain humanity was crushed under alien overlordship. Ruthless warlords reveled in Earth's downfall, erecting monuments to their victories. But amid the deepest shadows of space, a last human utterance crackled. They have not been victorious. Our warship yet sails. On the planet Taraxa, an extravagant victory parade exhibited a victory of an unprecedented kind. Soaring spires shimmered in the spellbound air, each draped with confetti and blazing lights that cheered the apparent end of humanity's hesitation. Alien civilians of every shape and size flocked to the crystal-trimmed boulevards for a weeks-long celebration. And the ecstatic chorus of cheers drowned out the thunderous boom of war drums on the march to victory, echoing in the lustrous halls of the capital city. To them, the human threat was now merely a historical curiosity, just another vanquished species in the annals of the galaxy's formidable coalition. For centuries, humanity had managed to hold its own through clever treaties, modest alliances, and occasional feats of technological innovation. However, despite their best efforts, the collective power of the alien coalition, led by the more militaristic Taraxans, the clever Siri, and the superintelligent Valaxi, was just too much. From city to city on Earth had fallen. Colonies, once shimmering with hope, were crushed. It was the final nail in the coffin when the alien forces snatched control of the Sol system's massive orbital defense ring and turned it against the humans still bunkered down on the ground. In the aftermath of that savage invasion, Earth's battered survivors signed an unconditional surrender. Millions of human survivors were marooned, scattered, or given menial labor on alien worlds. Reports from the news broadcasts told the same narrative. The human race was no longer a danger to anyone. The winning coalition announced a month-long event to be held across all the species that participated. The message was unmistakable. The human war was over, and the galaxy's destiny belonged to the coalition. Yet, between the fireworks spectacle and the raucous speeches, an ominous rumor floated around military circles. At the all-revealing corners of official alien data resided strange sensor returns. Ephemeral pulses of energy from a region once identified on human star charts as the Helion Drift. The region had been famous for dangerous gravitic anomalies, a part of space that turned navigational star charts into mere guessing. Over the decades, the humans had attempted to leverage this space for advanced warp tests, but the coalition was certain those projects had perished in the final sieges. So the rumor was dismissed. Who cares about the vague energy signatures of a shattered outpost? The alien generals were too wrapped in celebration, and no one wanted to kill the mood with ghost tales of a hidden human base. The humans were, after all, de facto leaderless. Their government was in exile, their military command, once so persistent, broken. That was the official line. Unofficially, a few of alien officers, particularly those in the Siri Intelligence Corps, registered some mild concern. The humans had always had a reputation for planning contingencies. Even in desperate positions, Earth forces would spring cunning ambushes or unleashing experimental prototypes, as the earliest days of the war had shown. This unpredictability had led to many painful coalition defeats before the conquest was complete. Some Siri watchers speculated that if any secret project had survived, it could be hidden where no scans could penetrate. Helion Drift. Far beyond the alien parades, hidden beneath the swirling cosmic storms of Helion Drift, one facility remained alive. Its hallways glowed with flashing red. Emergency lights. Inside, a skeletal crew of human engineers and officers hustled around an ovoid, coffin-like structure that lay cocooned at the center of a metal latticework, raised above the deck of a reinforced hangar. The surface which made up the structure, a black and reflective alloy, hummed with barely restrained power. This was the inevitability, humanity's greatest and most pernicious secret. Decades earlier, as the war raged in remote regions of space, advanced engineers had poured their hopes into a secret weapons project. Its goal was simple but audacious. Construct a warship that could reverse the tide against a militarily superior foe. The alien-based warp drive updates stolen from Siri laboratories, the predictive AI modules acquired through Valaxi studies, and the human-assisted power core were all integrated. The result was a starship far more than anything Earth's official fleets had put into the field. But such ambition came at a terrible price tag. The power needs were immense, and initial tests obliterated entire outposts. The final version of Inevitable Dawn was mothballed in the Helion drift in case it started melting down again, and it was given a shot on-site order as a last resort. When Earth fell, most thought there was no time or resources to deploy it. The project sponsors had died or disappeared. The Inevitable Dawn remained silent, waiting on a code word that would never come. But now that humanity has laid down its arms, a small group of stubborn survivors confronted a grim decision. They'd passed every security system to bring the warship online, retrieving the last scraps of data. Captain Lucia Alvarez, once a hotshot in Earth's Navy, was in command. She carried the scars, physical and emotional, of the Coalition's feral attacks. Her team consisted of specialized engineers, rogue scientists, and a few soldiers too fed up to accept the defeat. They had never wanted to use this warship, but as the Coalition reveled in their victory, and as humanity's spirit teetered on the brink of oblivion, they could find no other option. To them, the capitulation was a scrap of paper extorted by alien aggression. There was never going to be true acceptance of defeat. 3 sleepless days were needed to stabilize the warship's fusion core. Alvarez's immediate subordinate, Lieutenant Carter Henshaw, methodically validated each system. Weapons arrays? Green. Shields? Or possibly functional, but unproven in actual warfare. Hyperwarp drive? Theoretically functional. AI integration? Unstable, but stable enough to fly. Given the dire circumstances, uncertain was all they had to hope for. The moment the warship's systems hummed to full life, ghostly power waves coursed through the Helion drift. No frills Coalition monitoring stations still sawing their way through victory celebrations nabbed the anomalies on their sensors. Some flagged it as cosmic interference. Others identified it as an artificial energy signature. Siren alarms began sounding in remote outposts, warnings that were soon drowned out by the celebratory fog. Only the Siri intelligence watchers stayed on the alert, looking for patterns among the gravitational distortions. In the meantime, Captain Alvarez spoke to her skeleton crew. The warship's darkened command deck vibrated with the steady thrum of the reactor. She was soft, voice shaking with reverberation. They think we've lost our ability to fight. They believe we'll disappear from the cosmos without a struggle. Today we show them that they're wrong. Her words held the desperation and determination of a species on the precipice, desperate to share one last message. But unknown to the galaxy's smug victors, Inevitable Dawn was about to lift off. If it did succeed, it would be more than an isolated act of vengeance. It would be a beacon of hope, a sign that humanity was more than relics and ruins, but rather people who could change the course of war with a wave of the hand. The Coalition might have laid waste to Earth's cities, demanded surrender, scattered the survivors, but it had not snuffed out humanity's fighting spirit. The question that hung over all, human and alien alike, was a simple one. Could a single warship, no matter how advanced, change the fate of an entire galaxy? As Captain Alvarez and her intrepid crew prepared to make the plunge into enemy territory, they were willing to risk everything for the answer. Whether they succeeded or not, the galaxy was about to learn a harsh lesson. The final chapter of the human war had yet to be written. In fact, for the celebrants on Toraxa and beyond, the biggest shock was still to come. Barely had Inevitable Dawn extricated itself from the gravimetric maelstrom of the Helion drift before it faced its first challenge. An ambush patrol from the Siri reconnaissance fleet. Doubtful of the Helion drift's readings, the Siri had sent a small but nimble squadron to investigate. Because their own starships were narrow and dagger-shaped with little sensor profile, they observed the warship as soon as it came into view. Once upon a time, an unfortunate human vessel wandering into a well-armed Siri patrol would have faced a quick, one-sided defeat. But Captain Alvarez wasn't about to show weakness. On her orders, Inevitable Dawn opened up its forward particle lances. The new weapons she'd heard could slice through Coalition shields with scalpel-like precision. The Siri opened communications, ordering surrender, but the warship replied by ramming straight ahead at the lead vessel. The fight was astonishingly short. Bright, burning arcs erupted, volley after volley, fanning out from the human warship. Within seconds, the shields of the first Siri frigate collapsed. Then, a directed discharge fired by Inevitable Dawn triggered a reactor meltdown in a second frigate, causing the remaining Scirie to scatter. Realizing they were hopelessly outgunned, the patrol's remaining vessels fled at full speed. In their wake, pieces of glowing hulls drifted, silent testimonials to the fickleness of Earth's technology. The victory was validation for Alvarez and her crew. They had picked the right time to strike. But it also put them in the spotlight. News of the skirmish spread rapidly through coalition channels. The great powers, too busy with post-winning celebrations, rushed to confirm that a human warship really had attacked and sunk Scirie reconnaissance frigates. The notion seemed absurd. Humanity had surrendered. Their fleet lay in tatters, their officers dead or in detention. It must have been a hoax, or politeness, or maybe pirate ships recycling human hull designs. But caution bubbled up, even at the top levels. Scirie High Command secretly tapped deeper reserves, sending a heavier fleet toward the Helion Drift. Puffing with arrogance, the Taraxan Imperator dismissed the incident as insignificant, but ordered new sensor scans of the region regardless. In the meantime, the Valaxi, renowned for their analytical prowess, started disemboweling the Scirie battle logs, searching for patterns in the warship's energy output. They found irregularities similar to rumored, but unreleased, Earth prototypes. Their scientists had once theorized that humanity might be controlling advanced warplants technology, but a definitive data link had never been established until now. Back on Inevitable Dawn, spirits were high. Captain Alvarez knew the danger of indulging in premature celebrating, but her crew had earned a moment of pride. Henshaw had the engineers check the warship's systems again. The fight had used up some of their stored energy, but the advanced reactors had begun clicking up again with energy. The combined AI, which the engineers jokingly called Lumina, performed real-time threat assessments, predicting the upcoming engagements. On the command deck, the flickering holomap displayed masses of alien ships swirling together in real time. Each arrow pointed to a potential path of attack, a stark visual reminder of how badly outnumbered they were. That night, Alvarez spoke to her crew again over the ship-wide intercom. "We've won a skirmish, but we need to stay vigilant. All of you out there think we're done. Let's turn that arrogance against them." She expressed herself with unshakable conviction, though she did not pretend that the road ahead would be smooth. Sooner or later, the coalition would have a response that dwarfed any individual warship's capabilities. Their greatest advantage was mobility. The warship's state-of-the-art warp drive could achieve micro-jumps, brief bursts of faster-than-light travel that enabled Inevitable Dawn to make up ground or pounce when it wanted. Using that feature, the crew plotted a path that would hit several critical outposts deep in coalition territory, hoping to disrupt supply lines. They concluded that if they could sever the resource pipeline between big alien powers, the coalition might splinter. The first target was an orbital U-0978 station in the Zarela system, operated by the Taraxans. It had been a key staging ground for troop deployments and heavy artillery shipments. If Inevitable Dawn could take out that station, the supply chain for the entire sector would face a massive blow. It was a bold, some would say reckless, plan. But audacity was all that remained to humanity. Performing a micro-jump out of the Helion Drift, the warship coalesced near Zarela's gas giant. Sensor arrays embedded around the station sensed the intrusion, and alarms sounded within seconds. Taraxan cruisers launched from docks nearby, forming a defensive wall. The stage was set for a predictable collision. Captain Alvarez decided not to hide. She called for a direct approach, running the warship through the planet's rings to break up its profile. The AI synchronized lethal strikes from the warship's particle lance weapons, taking out one cruiser after another with every shot a clean hit. Taraxan plasma torpedoes flashed through space, yet Inevitable Dawn evaded or deflected. The majority with a sophisticated shield array. In a last, desperate sweep, Alvarez ordered a volley that pierced the station's outer hull and set off cascading chain reactions throughout the installation. Blown apart by internal detonations, the station became unusable. In less than an hour, the Zarela system's hallowed bastion was obliterated. Panic-filled distress calls poured in on coalition channels, warning of one warship with horrifying capabilities. All Taraxan reinforcements discovered was a burning hulk of twisted metal. And now the human warship had disappeared, leaving behind scant more than a salvageable blueprint. The reports of the defeat were spreading like wildfire. Suddenly, the prospect of humanity finally being defeated rang hollow throughout the coalition. Diplomatic chummery grew strained. The Sci-Fi High Command called for collective action, claiming that the humans had created illicit supercode. The Taraxan Imperator hissed at the grossness of his own domain being sullied. The Valaxi mowed its best to stay calm, sifting through data, trying to get more caution that was coordinated. But the rest of the coalition, especially smaller allied species that had previously acted as auxiliaries, became fearful. They had imagined a peaceful aftermath to the war, only to find a lingering human threat. In secret hideouts, human sympathizers silently rejoiced. Some hostile alien races who had resented the coalition's draconian hegemony also celebrated quietly, anticipating that humanity's battleship might shatter the coalition's iron grip. There were rumors that the human diaspora, prisoners and refugees spread out across 1,000 worlds, could be inspired by these daring assaults. The coalition's deep security apparatus kept these rebellious murmurs in check, but just below the surface they bubbled. In the meantime, Captain Alvarez assessed her situation. Morale was high, but the warship had its limits. Sustained combat depleting its advanced reactors, necessitating strategic downtime to top off. The skeleton crew, brilliant and determined, was too small to address major repairs if significant damage occurred. And as the coalition learned about their tactics, the less surprise would mean. Yet with every victory, the galaxy's outlook was changing. The coalition had once thought the human flame snuffed. Now they saw that sparks setting wildfires behind their lines. Step by step, the remorseless engine of alien supremacy was creaking, stuttering, revealing chinks in its once impenetrable armor. Desperate to save face, the Sci-Fi assembled a blockade force around a vital hyperlane in Kothar sector, a route that linked half the galaxy's trade routes. As a prime target for a guerrilla campaign, Kothar would be one of the humans' first sacrifices. Using state-of-the-art scanning hardware, the Sci-Fi blockaders set out to identify the distinctive warp signatures of inevitable dawn the second it attempted to microjump. Sure enough, Alvarez and her team were planning to be Kothar's strike team. The blockade was impressive. Dozens of cruisers, frigates, and support craft, each of them stuffed full of sensor arrays and heavily armed to meet the asteroids head-on. On the command deck of Inevitable Dawn, the holomap reeled in red, mapping the sheer spread of the threat. "We will never punch through that many ships head-on," Henshaw muttered. "Too many guns, too much cover." Alvarez nodded, lips tight. "Then we won't go head-on. Yeah, we take advantage of our warp." It was the plan, all within minutes. A series of micro-maneuvers meant to confuse the blockade. They would appear, hit weak points, then disappear before the main guns could react. It was a risky gambit that depended on perfect timing. At the appointed time, Inevitable Dawn dropped out of warp by the blockade's flank. Torpedoes streaked out, smashing into the Sci-Fi support ships. Before the main cruisers could rotate their turrets, the warship blinked out of existence in another microjump, manifesting behind the center of the blockade. This time, its particle lances sliced through frigates in mere seconds. Chaos reigned. In a last-ditch effort to combat the erratic leaps, the Sci-Fi layered their sensor nets, but only to have Inevitable Dawn disappear again. That nerve-wracking dance persisted until the blockade lay in ruins. Shattered hulls of frigates roamed empty, and communications devolved into panic-riddled desperation. The High Admiral of the blockade, aghast at the warship's evasive maneuvers, called off his remaining forces before losing all of them. It all ended with Kothar having an open field. The last warship of humanity flew the sector unopposed, except for the odd hush of terror inlaid across alien channels. In the immediate aftermath, one truth became inescapable. This was no ordinary late-in-the-game sabotage or mean-spirited revenge. But this was a counteroffensive. Humanity was, effectively, back on the battlefield. Members of the coalition faced a scramble to create a new war council. Their great victory was unraveling at terrifying speed. Every bloated alien warlord who had swelled with pride now described losses and called for reinforcements. Supplies, fuel reserves and key strategic points were threatened. Fear, not triumph, took the fore, and the jubilant marches around Taraxa turned into hurried attempts to fortify. But even in the midst of these successes, the crew of Inevitable Dawn felt their causes increasing weight. Sensors detected coalition fleets gathering on every side, billions of troops being mobilized. They were, in effect, one ship against an empire that stretched across the stars. With each successful strike, the coalition learned a new piece of information about their technology or tactics. The net was closing, but Captain Alvarez and her people were well beyond the point of no return. Their mission, to prove to the galaxy that humanity refused to die. The next phase of combat was imminent, guaranteed to challenge both the warship's capabilities and the crew's resolve. If they failed, the coalition would snuff out the last light of human defiance. If they won, they just might inflict a new destiny, not just on Earth, but on every species suffering beneath alien rule. That impending face-off was arriving more quickly than anyone understood, and the price would be unfathomable. With coalition war councils scrambling to respond, the last lines of defense began to coalesce around a crucial system dubbed Luria Prime. Heavily overseen by the Valaxi, this star system was the linchpin of the coalition's logistics network. A maze of shipyards surrounded the central world, producing dreadnoughts and fighter ships at a scale nowhere else in the galaxy matched. Gigantic distribution HQs and supply chain for entire fleets. If Inevitable Dawn could bring Luria Prime to its knees, it would dismantle the war machine that had trampled Earth. But the defenders were aware of their own vulnerabilities. They set up a network of sensor platforms around the system. They called up the strongest ships from every coalition partner to build a massive defensive fleet. Taraxans sent their maxis, fish-like submersibles, loaded with plasma bombs. Cloaked scout vessels were dispatched by the Siri to flush out the human warship. The Valaxi themselves deployed a newly engineered psychic disruptor, which, rumor had it, would overload any AI or neural interface in range. Countless smaller species also contributed support craft and infantry, creating a fortress that, in theory, no one vessel could penetrate. On the damaged but still standing bridge of Inevitable Dawn, Captain Alvarez conferred with her senior officers. Holographic displays illuminated the chamber, showing a sea of crimson dots, enemy vessels, prepared for their arrival. Lieutenant Henshaw had a grim expression on his face. That's more firepower that has ever been seen in one place. If we jump in the wrong place, we'll be vaporized on the spot. Alvarez studied the data. Terror clawed at her insides, but so did the steel resolve that had gotten them this far. To wait is not a luxury we have, she added. If that coalition regroups here, they'll kick off a retaliation campaign that will level every human enclave across the galaxy. This is our best chance at beating them. Lumina, the warship's AI, hummed gently through the speakers. If we act and directly face the Luria Prime fleet, my calculations predict a 22% chance of success. But if we can ignite certain chain reactions among the plasma conduits of the shipyard, our chances are magnified. The station's power grid is its Achilles heel. The plan unfolded in strata. The first step is to launch an overwhelming feint that draws the coalition's main batteries away from the shipyards. Then, a surgical micro-jump inside the station's perimeter to attack the station's plasma conduits. Blow them up to disable the shipyard's manufacturing lines. Finally, flee before the fleet can bring torches to the festivities. It was terrifyingly dangerous. Any misstep would result in utter destruction. But success would cripple the coalition's ability to mass-produce warships for months, maybe years. The coalition was prepared when Inevitable Dawn dropped out of warp at the edges of Luria Prime. Prisoners of war stretched across the wide of the ocean, advancing in tight formation, with waves of cruisers piling on emissions, layering shield projectors over a broad stretch of space. Fighter wings streamed from carriers, a black cloud of deadly flecks. The whole region looked like an iron wall. Suddenly, the warship's sensors screeched in alarm. They had zeroed in on her hull signature. Hordes of torpedoes and energy beams scrambled through the vacuum within seconds, tracing brilliantly in the dark. The ship's state-of-the-art deflectors and Alvarez's evasive maneuvers helped to absorb the first wave. Twisting and banking, Inevitable Dawn coursed through the chaos, returning fire with its particle lances. Explosions erupted as enemy fighters fell by the dozens. But for every wave destroyed, more came crashing. Henshaw called out updates. Shields at 70%. Reactor strain rising. Sweat poured down the faces of the crew members, who operated in concert to test the warship's limits. A brief gap opened, an overshoot of the coalition's forward momentum. Alvarez took advantage of that opening. Execute microjump, she ordered. With a flickering of blurred light, Inevitable Dawn vanished, reappearing several kilometers away, deep in the perimeter. The coalition fleet scrambled to adapt, but the warship executed the maneuver again and again, each jump delivering a new volley of devastation to vital enemy resources. Then the Valaxi psychic disruptor activated. It was a cacophony, a resonant wave that melded into the fabric of space around it, tuned specifically to overload advanced AIs and any integrated humanized neural links. Lumina's voice trembled, the screens glowed with digital static. Crew members experienced a pain in their head described as a sharp, piercing sensation like an ice pick through the skull. The warship had momentarily lost fine control. Alvarez clenched her teeth against a swirl of pain, compelling herself to concentrate. Lumina, adapt. Isolate the disruptor's frequency wave, she yelled. The AI stuttered in and out, but within seconds it had quickly recalibrated. The warship's data cores, generating a buffer zone that protected core systems from the full brunt of the psychic attack. The disruptor still confused them, but it no longer put them at risk of being shut down altogether. However, the warship's weave broke at a crucial point when a group of coalition frigates leveled direct fire. Explosions shook the hull. Showers of sparks had blasted across the bridge. Warning lights flashed. Alvarez grit her teeth, looking over the readouts. Damage to lower decks, some partial depressurization in some compartments. Yet the primary reactor and weapons array were still operational. Continuing on, she took one last microjump, this one dropping them within visual range of the shipyards. The enormous station filled the view, a ring structure outfitted with docking pylons, most filled with half-completed warships and weapon platforms. The strategy relied on striking the station's plasma conduits, which curled around its circumference. If they could flood the system, the resulting meltdown would spread throughout the station. Henshaw lined up the shot. Particle lances powered up. The warship trembled from its nose to its engines. Then, in one long, steady burst, a tight beam missing through the station's exterior plating. Alarms whined through. The ring as pressurized chambers vented from space. Lining up with the beams, a volley of high-yield torpedoes slammed into the fresh rupture, setting off a cascade of explosions that flickered around the ring. The station's plasma conduits lit up, one by one, like dominoes. A literally monstrous explosion shook the station. Flashes of blinding light pulsed in waves, catching coalition ships that remained too close to the blast radius. Hulls bent and twisted, some vessels breaking up altogether. Frigates, cruisers, even a couple of carriers were taken by the shockwave. The famous shipyards of Luria Prime were a conflagration of jagged metal and roiling plasma fires. But Inevitable Dawn was also caught in the turbulence. The explosion slammed into the warship, taking systems down one by one. Fusion transmission discards exploded. The forward deflectors did not work. The boat's frame creaked from the stress. "Warp drive is offline," said Henshaw, the hoarse urgency of his voice. "We're stuck until we get it back." The coalition fleet regrouped for a final push with the station exploding in the background. Thorax and carrier vessels deployed new fighter wings. Sciry corvettes guarded the warship's exposed flanks. The Valaxi capital ships inched forward, psychic. Disruptors powering up. In minutes, Inevitable Dawn was encircled, pummeled by a nonstop barrage of missile after missile. In the chaos of damage readouts swirling before him, Alvarez noticed one opportunity. The closest route to open space passed directly through the middle of the coalition formation. An ill-fated run, by any reasonable measure. But if the warship hung around, it would be swamped. "Reroute all remaining power to engines and forward guns," she said, voice shaking. "We either break through or we die here." The ship, battered as it was, heaved forward. Particle lances erupted in a constant harangue, literally clearing a path. Coalition vessels detonated or fled in a panic. With fires raging in several decks, the warship continued. Another wave of Galaxy disruptors scorched across the vessels, but the partial shielding held just enough to keep the warship operational. Piece by piece, blast by blast, inevitable dawn carved through the blockade and left in its wake a trail of burning coalition wreckage. Finally, the warship did break free, its engines chugging but still alive. As they left Luria Prime behind, the view was almost surreal. An impregnable fortress filled with seething flame and drifting debris, now shattered and gone. There was silence across the entire communications landscape of the region. The coalition forces, ravaged and scattered, watched as the last human warship escaped, dealing a lethal blow to the heart of their war machine. On the bridge of inevitable dawn, joy and sorrow converged. The corridor lights were flickering, power failing, but Captain Alvarez and her crew wore expressions of wonder, relief, fierce victory. They had landed a blow that could change the entire nature of the conflict. Humanity was no longer cornered prey. The coalition's stranglehold on the galaxy was not absolute, as this single act of devastation had demonstrated. But the price had been steep. The warship was heavily damaged, and the crew was worn out. Nevertheless, the emotional payoff was there. They had reclaimed the story of the war. For the first time since Earth had fallen, the idea of a human victory was no longer a desperate fantasy. It was a living, breathing reality. The news spread through subspace channels in confused and horrified voices. Humans had destroyed Luria Prime's main shipyards. And if the crew of Inevitable Dawn could do that, what else might they do? The grievously damaged warship found a calm spot in space, where it could effect emergency repairs. Captain Alvarez paused and leaned against a blackened console. She recalled Earth's last days, the hopelessness in every soldier's eyes. Then she compared that memory with the raw hope now coursing through her small but dogged crew. They had done the unthinkable. And everywhere, billions of humans, who once had felt certain they were doomed, might soon learn that the battle wasn't close to being lost. They had weathered the worst the coalition could unleash against them. They had destroyed a stronghold of alien power. In a galaxy that thought them dead, they had taken a stand that would be remembered for light years. Humanity would not be conquered. In the following days, shock was a tidal wave crashing on every major coalition world. Whatever happened at Luria Prime was more than just a tactical defeat. It was a blow to the coalition's prestige and morale, a reminder that arrogance had its price. Alien commanders who had proudly proclaimed final victory on the battlefield were now scrambling to placate and terrified citizenry demanding a response. The juggernaut of coalition conquest had stumbled, blindsided by a lone warship. In Taraxa, the Grand Victory Parade stand sat bare. The victorious bunting and confetti-littered empty streets, now signs of a hubris that no longer existed. The Imperator, sorely embarrassed, called crisis meetings with the Scyri and Valaxi. Each tried to shift the blame for the debacle, reaching to find fissures in their once solid alliance. And smaller species, smelling fear, started hinting at independence movements or making treaties for new partnerships with a resurgent humanity. Human captives heard bits of rumor across remote prison colonies and labor camps. Initially, the stories were too fantastic to credit. That a state-of-the-art Earth vessel had broken through the blockade at Kothar, sabotaged the Taraxan station at Zarila, and finally obliterated the shipyards at Luria Prime. But as more credible reports emerged, hope blossomed among the oppressed. A little violence was simmering just below the surface, and rebellious embers flickered in once broken eyes. Meanwhile, on Inevitable Dawn, Captain Alvarez and her surviving crew toiled tirelessly, pouring hour after hour into repairing damaged systems. They found what they could in concealed depots or begged from neutral stations that were sympathetic or, at the minimum, had an interest in avoiding the coalition's ire. Though their warship had criticism still to pay to the brush of the recent fight, the crew felt enthused by what they had done. That determination was fueled like never before by the fact that billions of humans could, if only for a short time, see that there was still a champion in their corner. Thus, in more hushed corners of the galaxy, top-secret communication began to be transmitted. Resistance cells sprung up, led by brave souls of all species who had become disillusioned with the coalition's oppression. Many offered to collaborate with Inevitable Dawn. They didn't ask for protection, they asked for leadership. For the first time since the fall of Earth, an interstellar solidarity felt possible, a counterweight of defiance to the rule of the coalition. How long could one ship stand up to the might of empire? No one knew. Even with its losses, the coalition still dwarfed human resources. But the importance of inevitable dawn now meant more than just raw firepower. It was a beacon, a message scrawled in the stars. Humans would never stand for extinction or denial. Even at the height of their doom, they had created a weapon so terrifying that it jolted the galaxy out of apathy. When Captain Alvarez finally stood up to face her exhausted, jubilant crew, her voice fought the urge to tremble with the occasion. We started this mission to show that humanity wasn't done. We've done that, and more. Now, the galaxy watches, and it isn't only humans. Traits repressed by the coalition or coerced into obedience through terror recognize a glimmer of hope in us. Let me never forget what this warship really symbolizes. The whole body of inevitable dawn glimmered in the dim lights. The scars of battle wrought into each plate like a tale of survival. From this point forward, every jump, every fight, and every ally gained would determine the fate of the galaxy. War was inevitable, but so too was the prospect of liberation, a future in which Earth's children weren't cowering but had risen, reclaimed their rightful place among the stars. Beyond the mirage of an effortless victory, the alien empires faced a harsh new truth. Humanity, though bloodied, was unbowed. And as the news came from vessels guardians of every Federation world, the Imperator of Toraxa himself had to admit a bitter fact. The war they had thought to have won had barely begun. Humanity had returned, and this time they would never be conquered.